The wind carried the scent of sage and dust across the open plains, a lonely hymn that belonged to a land older than any memory. The sun was sinking behind the red cliffs, staining the world in copper and gold. Her horse stumbled over the uneven earth, its hooves thudding softly as she urged it forward. Behind her, the horizon stretched endlessly, and with it, the sound of pursuit. The riders were coming fast, and their voices cut through the dusk like a curse. She glanced back once, just once, and saw them cresting the ridge, their rifles gleaming in the dying light. Fear coiled inside her, but she didn't stop. Her pale dress, torn and dirt-streaked, clung to her arms as the wind whipped through her hair. Somewhere beyond the next bend, the desert met the canyon, and if she could just make it that far, maybe she could lose them. She didn't know what waited ahead, but she knew what lay behind, and she would rather face the unknown than go back. The land fell silent for a heartbeat, except for the drumbeat of her heart and the whisper of her horse's breath. Then from the canyon's shadow, a shape emerged, a figure, standing beside a painted Mustang, watching her with stillness that seemed almost unnatural. His skin glowed bronze beneath the sun, his dark hair braided with eagle feathers, his stance both calm and ready. The Apache warrior didn't move until she was nearly upon him. Her horse reared, startled by his sudden presence, and she nearly lost her grip. He caught the reins before she fell, his hands steady and sure. Their eyes met for the first time, hers wide with fear and desperation, his steady but searching, as if he was trying to read her soul. "Please," she breathed, her voice barely more than wind. "They're coming." He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. The echoes of galloping hooves and distant shouts told the story for her. In one smooth motion, he mounted his Mustang and pulled her up behind him. Before she could speak again, the horse leaped forward into the deepening dusk, carrying them both into the heart of the canyon. The shouts behind them grew faint as the path twisted between walls of red stone. The world narrowed to the sound of wind and hooves and the rhythm of their breathing. She clung to him, the warmth of his back solid beneath her trembling hands. He rode like the wind obeyed him, weaving through narrow trails and hidden passages that only one born of this land could know. When they finally stopped, the world had gone quiet again. He dismounted and turned to her, his eyes reflecting the fire of the sunset. "You should not be here," he said quietly. His voice was deep and low, like the earth speaking through him. "I had nowhere else to go," she whispered. Her lips trembled as she looked at him, unsure if she had escaped danger or stepped into something greater. For a long moment, he said nothing. The canyon wind brushed against them, stirring the fringe on his buckskin vest and lifting the loose strands of her hair. Then he nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of her fear, her courage, or perhaps something he saw that she didn't yet understand. He led her deeper into the canyon, where a small fire already burned near a stream. She sat beside it, her hands shaking as she reached toward the warmth. He moved quietly, his every gesture filled with a deliberate grace that made her feel both safe and uncertain. When he handed her a cup of water, their fingers brushed. It was a simple touch, accidental, nothing meant by it, but the air changed. The crackle of the fire grew louder, the night darker, the moment sharper. She looked up, and for a heartbeat, everything stopped. Something in his eyes broke her fear. Something in her face broke his silence. It wasn't love, not yet, but something older, deeper, like the earth recognizing the rain. He turned away first, as if the world might shatter if he looked too long. But she saw the faint tremor in his hands, the tension in his jaw. He wasn't untouched by her presence. He was trying to fight it. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above the fire's whisper. "If you hadn't been there." He didn't let her finish. "The men who chase you, why?" She hesitated. The truth was tangled with shame and loss, with choices she wished she hadn't made, and others she'd never had a chance to make. "They took everything from me," she said at last. "I took something back." He studied her face for a long time, his gaze as steady as the desert itself. "Then you cannot return," he said. "I don't plan to." He nodded again and stood, scanning the canyon walls as if he expected danger to crawl from the shadows. She watched him move, the silent power in him both frightening and comforting. He was unlike anyone she'd ever known, part of a world that didn't bow to rules or mercy, yet carried both in his heart. That night, she couldn't sleep. The stars above seemed too close, the silence too deep. Across the fire, he sat with his bow resting on his knees, eyes half closed but alert. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Why did you help me?" He opened his eyes, and the firelight caught them like amber. "Because you looked like someone who had already lost too much," he said. She turned her face away, but his words followed her into the dark. By dawn, the canyon was alive with the sound of birds. She stood by the stream, washing her hands, feeling the cool water ease the dust from her skin. When she looked up, he was watching her again, his expression unreadable. The morning light painted him in gold, and she felt something stir inside, her warmth she couldn't explain, and a fear that came with it. He saddled his horse and said, "They will keep searching. You cannot stay here." She wanted to ask where she could go, but before she spoke, he added, "There's a place beyond the ridge, old land. No one dares to follow there." "Will you take me?" she asked. He hesitated, his hands stilling on the reins. For a moment, he didn't look at her. Then slowly he said, "If I do, you must understand there is no turning back." "I already crossed that line," she said quietly. Their eyes met again, and something passed between them that neither could name. They rode through the canyon together, the rising sun at their backs, shadows long and golden on the sand. As they reached the ridge, the land opened before them, vast, wild, untamed. She looked at it and felt both fear and freedom. He turned toward her, his voice softer than the wind. "The world beyond this place will not be kind to you, but if you stay close, you might survive it." She met his gaze, and something inside her, something that had been frozen for years, began to thaw. "Then I'll stay close," she said. For a moment, neither moved. Then the horse stepped forward, and she placed her hand lightly against his back for balance. His muscles tensed beneath her touch, and the smallest tremor ran through him. He turned his head slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet once more. Her touch was meant only for steadiness, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. In that instant, something inside him shifted, something he couldn't name or fight. And when she whispered, her voice trembling with the truth she didn't yet understand, "Your touch changed everything." The Apache lost his soul in that instant. The wind rose again, carrying the sound of distant thunder. Somewhere beyond the ridge, danger waited, but for now. Only silence filled the space between them, heavy and alive. As the story of their fates began to unfold, the ride through the desert stretched on, long enough for the silence between them to settle like dust. The woman's eyes searched the horizon, but there was no end in sight, just the open land, burning gold under the sun. Apache rode ahead, his movements silent, his posture straight as if he carried the weight of centuries on his shoulders. She wanted to ask his name, but something about his quiet strength made her afraid to break the spell that held them both. They stopped at a ridge overlooking a dry riverbed. The air shimmered with heat, and the earth below looked like a patchwork of bones and sand. He dismounted and handed her a water pouch without a word. She drank, trying not to notice how closely he watched her, like a man trying to understand something far beyond language. At last he spoke. "You said they took everything? Who are they?" Her throat tightened. "Men from the fort," she said. "They call themselves peacekeepers, but they're nothing of the kind." He waited, his expression unreadable. She lowered her gaze. "My father worked their land. When the drought came, they forced us off it. My brother fought back, and they hung him for it. I tried to run. They said I was a thief, but I only took what was mine." His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. In his silence, she felt both judgment and understanding. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her, a trespasser, a survivor, or just another face from the world that had taken so much from his people. "You are hunted," he said at last. "It won't stop." "I know." She met his gaze again. "Then why did you help me?" He turned toward the horizon, where storm clouds gathered like smoke. "So I know what it means to lose everything." For a while neither spoke. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain that might never fall. He led his horse down a narrow path toward the valley, and she followed, her mind heavy with questions. As dusk settled again, they reached a hidden clearing, a camp surrounded by tall rocks and shaded by twisted mesquite trees. A few other figures moved near the fire, quiet but alert. They looked up when the Apache arrived, their eyes sharp with suspicion. "She needs rest," he said simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. One of the men, older and scarred, stepped forward. "You bring trouble, brother. The soldiers will follow her scent. Then they'll find nothing but wind," the Apache replied. The older man studied the woman for a long time before stepping back. "Your choice, not mine." She sat by the fire, listening to the low hum of their language, soft, rhythmic, full of meaning she couldn't grasp, but somehow felt in her bones. The Apache sat across from her, his eyes reflecting the flames. She noticed now the faint scars on his hands, the necklace made of bone and stone that hung against his chest. Every part of him spoke of a life bound to the land, shaped by it. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "You don't trust me," he looked up. "Trust is not given. It is earned." "I don't blame you," she said quietly. "My people took your land, your homes. I've seen what they call justice. It's only peace for those who hold the gun." He didn't answer, but something in his face softened. She couldn't tell if it was pity or something deeper. Later, as night settled over the camp, she lay awake near the fire. The sound of the desert surrounded her, the soft hoot of an owl, the whisper of the wind through dry grass. She could see him sitting on a rock nearby, staring into the dark, his silhouette outlined by starlight. She thought of his calm when he first appeared from the canyon, the steadiness in his hands as he pulled her to safety. She didn't know his story, but she could sense the loneliness in him, the kind that comes from losing too much for too long. She wondered if he had a family, a tribe still waiting somewhere in the distance. Or if, like her, he had been left behind by a world that had stopped caring. When morning came, the others had gone. Only he remained, packing supplies into a small leather pouch. "They've gone to warn others," he said. "If the soldiers find us, you must be ready to move. I'll go wherever you go," she said before she could stop herself. He paused, his eyes meeting hers in silence. Then he said, "There's a place where the rivers still run. My people call it the Valley of Shadows. Few know the way. If you wish to live, that's where we go." They rode together again, deeper into the wild land. Sun rose behind them, fierce and unyielding. The world seemed endless rolling hills, narrow ravines, the cries of hawks echoing in the sky. She found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, studying the way he moved, how his hand rested on the reins like part of the horse itself. He didn't talk much, but every word he did speak carried weight. When they stopped to rest, he showed her how to read the tracks in the sand, how to tell where water might be found by the curve of dry grass or the whisper of insects. "Out here," he said, "the land speaks. If you listen, it will guide you." She smiled faintly. "And if it doesn't, then you're already lost." The way he said it made her shiver, not because it sounded harsh, but because she believed him. As days passed, she began to sense that something else hunted them, not just soldiers, but a memory that followed him like a shadow. Sometimes when the wind was quiet, he would look toward the west, his eyes dark and distant. Once she asked, "What are you looking for?" He didn't answer at first.
What?
Then he said, "A ghost." She didn't ask more, but that night she saw him kneeling by the fire, whispering words she didn't understand, his face caught between grief and anger. The following morning, they came upon the ruins of an old settlement, charred wood, broken wheels, a rusted kettle half buried in the dust. She dismounted, touching a piece of scorched cloth that might once have been someone's home. "What happened here?" she asked. "War," he said simply. "Your people burned this village 2 winters ago. My brother died here." The words cut through her like a blade. She wanted to speak, to say she was sorry, but no apology could touch that kind of loss. She looked at him and saw, for the first time, not just strength but pain carved deep into him. When they left the ruins, the silence between them grew heavier. Yet beneath it, something unspoken had begun to change. She no longer felt like a stranger beside him, and he no longer rode with the same guarded distance. The land itself seemed to breathe with their rhythm, the crunch of hooves, the soft rustle of grass, the murmur of wind carrying secrets neither could yet face. By the 4th night, a storm rolled in from the west. They took shelter beneath a rocky outcrop. Rain fell in sheets, drumming against stone and earth. She sat beside him, the firelight flickering across their faces. He glanced at her. "The rain will wash away our tracks," he said. "Then maybe they'll lose us, or maybe it's the land's way of hiding us." She looked at him through the smoke. "Do you believe the land protects you?" "I believe it remembers," he said quietly. It remembers everything we've done to it. The thunder rolled above them, long and deep. She turned toward the fire, watching the sparks leap and fade. "And what about you?" she asked softly. "What do you remember?" He met her gaze, his eyes shadowed with something she couldn't name. "More than I wish I did." For a long moment neither moved. The rain slowed, but the world outside remained dark. The firelight danced between them, warm against the chill. In the quiet, their hands brushed again, an echo of that first accidental touch. Only this time, neither pulled away. He looked down at her fingers resting against his. She didn't speak, didn't move. The weight of everything unsaid hung in the air, the loss, the guilt, the strange, fragile bond forming between two people who should have been enemies. Then he drew his hand back, slow and deliberate, his voice low. "We leave before dawn." And though she nodded, her heart knew that something had already changed between them, something that neither the desert nor the storm could erase. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the world for a single heartbeat before returning it to darkness. The echo lingered like a warning, whispering of the dangers still to come and the secret that would soon test both their souls. Dawn broke thin and gray, the kind of light that made every shape uncertain. They rode out while the storm clouds still dragged their shadows over the hills. The land smelled like wet stone and creosote. The woman kept her shoulders straight, but her thoughts churned. She had told the Apache only part of it. Men from the fort were not chasing her only because she ran. They were chasing what she carried. Tucked into her saddle roll, wrapped in a strip of canvas, lay a ledger taken from the office of the quartermaster. It was heavy with names and numbers, heavier with the secrets behind them. She had seen the columns clearly by lantern light. Shipments that never arrived, rations marked for tribes but sold to a rancher with long reach. Ammunition counted twice. Riverland listed as abandoned and reassigned to a company no one in town had heard of. Her brother had died fighting a noose. This ledger showed the rope had been knotted by many hands. The Apache led them toward a spine of hills, then cut across a wash where water still glimmered between stones. He said little, but the woman sensed he felt the same press of time that she did. She thought about telling him the truth, then saw the muscles in his jaw when he scanned the horizon and kept it inside. She did not want to make him a target for the greed of men she had only just learned to fear properly. He rode like the ground whispered to him. When he raised his hand, they both stopped, and a hair lifted from a clump of yucca and vanished like smoke. He nodded once, as if the land had just answered a question. Far behind them, a line of riders moved along the riverbank. The man at the front wore a weathered hat and a coat with a single silver button at the collar. He rode with the shape of a man who had sat too long in saddles and offices alike. He had a map in his breast pocket and an ache in his ribs that winter had left as a gift. He told his men they chased a thief and an outlaw. He did not tell them the ledger could ruin him. He did not speak of the rancher whose hand had rested on his shoulder the night before, whose smile had been soft as butter and twice as slippery. He had served the flag with pride once, back when the river still ran full. He had watched pride bend into something else, when orders mixed with favors and the new railroad cut through promises like wire through cloth. Among the riders was a young scout with eyes the color of wet ash. He had a mother who spoke to the plants in their garden, and a father who drove freight wagons under a sky that never ended. He could read tracks the way other men read letters. When he saw the Mustang's prints twist into stone and vanish, he felt a tug in his chest that was not duty. He had seen the Apache once before, years earlier, when a dispute at the trading post had nearly become worse. The Apache had stepped between a drunk homesteader and a boy with a knife, had pushed both weapons down with an empty hand. The scout had never forgotten that calm. He watched the captain press his heels into his horse. He kept riding, but a second trail grew in his heart. By noon, the sun burned through the last of the storm haze. The Apache guided them along a shelf of rock that opened into a narrow valley lined with cottonwoods. The trees spoke with rattling leaves, and the sound made the woman think of rain on canvas. There were old hearthstones near the water, the kind that belonged to people who moved with the seasons and left only what the wind could carry. The Apache dismounted and ran his palm over a groove in the rock. His fingers found ash so fine it seemed like dust. He had played here as a child, before soldiers had set fire to his brother's laughter. The land remembered, closed his eyes for a breath. When he opened them, he found the woman watching, quiet as a prayer. They made a small camp to rest the horses. While the Apache checked the irons and mended a broken strap with sinew, the woman unwrapped the canvas from her saddle roll. Her hands trembled. She flipped to the pages she had marked with thread. There it was again, a list of parcels along the river, marked as forfeited due to drought, transferred to a shell company that paid no tax and kept no office. The same name appeared after every transfer, written in a neat hand that never smudged. She had learned the meaning the night she ran. The fort was not just taking food. It was cutting the land from under the people who lived upon it, carving water from their mouths to sell by the barrel. She felt something cold settle inside her. The Apache watched her fold the ledger tight, and though she said nothing, the set of her mouth told him the trouble behind them was not ordinary. When the heat softened, they moved again, following a game trail that wound toward the Valley of Shadows. The Apache said the name without ceremony. It was not a place of ghosts in the storybook sense. It was a pocket of earth where cliffs turned the light aside and a river ran beneath the stone. Those who did not know the paths called it cursed. Those who did called it necessary. The woman listened and thought of the word shelter. She did not know yet if the path would be a refuge or a snare. She did know the man beside her had chosen to share it, and that choice weighed more than any promise spoken aloud. As evening stretched, they found a trading post set low against a bluff, its walls built from stacked sod and split cedar. A faded sign swung in the breeze, and the door creaked like a tired saddle. Inside, a woman with iron-gray hair and a steady gaze counted beans into a sack. She looked up, took in the Apache first, then the woman's dust-streaked dress. Then the way both of them carried themselves like people who expected trouble and would not be surprised to meet it at dinner. She gave them coffee and a place by the stove. She did not ask for names. She did ask if the horse in the yard could use barley. When the Apache nodded, she scooped grain into a pail without a word. The trader had a drawer where she kept news. Not newspapers, which came late and lied early, but words carried by mule, memory, and rumor. She had heard soldiers were searching the river for a thief. She had heard a cattle buyer's wagons moved at night without lanterns. She had heard a preacher in town had begun speaking more loudly about sin when his brother bought 3 new suits. She murmured all this while she stacked tins. The woman listened and felt the ledger burn against her side. The Apache stood near the door, watching a pair of riders water their mounts at the trough. One of the riders was the young scout. Their eyes met for only a moment, but it was long enough for both men to recognize a line that might not stay on the ground. That night, they slept in the loft above the store. The rafters smelled like hay and old tobacco. The woman woke to the sound of rain tapping lightly on the roof and the murmur of voices below. She crawled to the edge and looked down. The trader stood at the counter with the scout. He held his hat in his hands, turning the brim slowly while he spoke. He said he had been told to follow a trail into the hills at first light. He said the captain carried a letter with a seal that looked important enough to hide. He did not say why his voice sounded like it had been rubbed raw. The trader listened and refilled his coffee twice. When he rose to leave, she said only that the land had a way of setting debts straight, and that sometimes a man had to choose where to stand before the wind blew him there anyway. At dawn, the Apache woke the woman with a finger to his lips. They slipped out the back and saddled the horses under a sky still the color of tin. The trader pressed a small bundle of dried meat into the woman's hands and a single flint into the Apache's palm. Her eyes were hard, but her voice was kind. She told them there was a cattle trail that split near the arroyo. One path went toward the fort, the other toward a broken spire of rock that pointed like a finger. If they kept the spire on their left, they would find the old riverbed that led toward the Valley of Shadows. She did not ask where they went after that. She had learned that some roads do not share their endings. The captain and his riders reached the trading post by noon. He asked his questions with a smile. He left 2 coins pressed into the trader's hand that she later dropped into the stove. The scout did not look toward the loft. He knelt by the trough and studied the ground as if the story of the morning lay there in the mud. He found a print that was more suggestion than shape, the curve of a Mustang's shoe-kissing stone. He stood and told the captain the fugitives had likely taken the cattle trail toward the fort. Then he asked to scout ahead alone. The captain granted it because he trusted the boy's eyes. The boy rode out with the spire to his left. As the day wore on, the Apache and the woman followed the old riverbed into a country where stone held the sun like a furnace. The air shimmered. Lizards slipped into cracks. The land felt as if it had been carved for the purpose of hiding. The Apache pointed out places where water pooled after storms, where roots dug deep and could be chewed if a man had no choice. The woman listened and repeated each lesson softly, as if speaking it would stitch it into her bones. When they stopped in the thin shade of a boulder, she showed him a page from the ledger. She could not keep the secret any longer. He stared at the columns, then at the names. One of those names belonged to the officer who had ordered the burning of the village where his brother had died. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was quiet. The ledger was not only a weight she carried, it was a door. Behind it stood all the men who had decided which lives to count and which lives to erase. He understood then why her eyes had looked like a house with the windows boarded and the fire still burning inside. He closed the book gently, said they would keep it hidden until the right hands could hold it.
Yes.
He did not say whose hands those might be. He did not say whether justice meant courtrooms or something older. As they neared the mouth of the valley, the air cooled. The trail dropped between two walls of dark stone, and the light changed from harsh gold to a dim blue that made edges soft. The Apache's Mustang flicked its ears and moved carefully. The woman felt the world narrow and grow larger at once, like stepping into a church built by rivers and time. She sensed they were not alone. Little sounds lived here. Water ran somewhere below. A hawk cried above, and the echo returned as a whisper. She felt the Apache's tension before she saw what he had noticed. A fragment of fresh leather hung from a thorn. Whoever had come through had passed within a day. They pushed on, careful and slow, following the faint scrawl of a path along the cliff. The woman's thoughts shifted to her brother's last day. She remembered the crease between his brows, the way he had stood straight, even with a rope near enough to smell the hemp. He had told her not to be afraid of men who used fear like money. He had told her to keep her hands open so they could hold truth when it came. She carried that memory beside the ledger and felt both cut and healed by it. The path turned and widened to a shelf with a view of the hidden river. Pools glimmered like coins scattered in a pocket of shade. The Apache paused, eyes narrowed. In the mud near the nearest pool lay a boot print with a notch missing from the heel. He knew that notch. It belonged to the captain. The print was heading toward the far wall, where a crack in the rock looked like nothing at first glance. He swallowed the curse that rose in his throat. The captain had found another way in. The valley was not a secret anymore. It was a crossroads. A rustle behind them made both turn. The young scout rode from a gap in the wall, reins loose, hands held away from his body to show he meant no harm. Up close, he looked more tired than dangerous. The Apache drew his bow anyway. The woman stepped forward and said she knew him from the post only by the way his eyes had not followed orders. The scout said he did not come to take them back, came to tell them the captain was driving them toward an iron gate at the far end of the valley where wagons could pass. Beyond that lay a corral hidden by willows, and in that corral waited men who were not soldiers. He said the captain did business that did not wear a uniform. The Apache asked why he should believe a man who wore a scout's badge for the fort that had burned his brother. The boy did not flinch. Said he had watched a treaty get folded into a pocket and replaced with a deed. He said he did not want to spend the rest of his life guiding wolves to pens where lambs waited. He handed the Apache a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. Inside lay a strip of paper torn from a ledger. The same neat hand named a shipment of rifles diverted to private hands and a date that matched the burning of the village. The woman felt the ground tilt beneath her. Wind moved through the canyon like a breath. The Apache looked at the boy, at the woman, at the river that had never stopped running even when men fought over its banks. He said if they were to survive this place, they would need to move where the captain expected them least. The boy nodded. He knew a path that clung to the cliff like a ribbon, a path used by goats and ghosts. It would take them above the gate, above the corral, to a ledge where a man could see who profited from stolen water and stolen lives. They led the horses single file along the narrow way. The rocks scraped stirrups and patience alike. Below, men's voices rose and fell, carried by the stone. The woman saw wagons hidden beneath the willows, their canvas dark with tar. She saw barrels stacked like harvest, each marked with a brand that matched the company named in the ledger. She saw a man step from the shade and lift his hat to the captain. The Apache's breath hardened.
At!
He knew that face. It belonged to the rancher who had offered blankets in winter and taken pasture in spring. The men shook hands as if they stood in a church. The ledge narrowed to the width of a man's foot. The goat path bent around a tooth of rock. Scout went first, then the woman, then the Apache, leading the Mustang with a rope. A stone rolled and snapped against the wall. One of the men below paused and tilted his head. The woman froze, heart beat loud enough to shake the cliff. The Apache's hand touched her back, light as a promise. The voices below drifted into laughter again. They moved on, inch by inch, toward a notch where the ledge opened to a flat shelf high above the corral. There the boy pointed to a seam in the wall. Behind it, he said, ran an old water channel cut by his grandfather's father when the river still roared. It tunneled through the rock and came out near a stand of pines. From there, a ridge road led to a settlement that kept its own counsel and did not trust silver smiles. If they could reach it, they might find ears willing to hear the story the ledger told. If they failed, the captain would own the river, the valley, and their silence. The Apache stared into the tunnel's dark and weighed costs he had been counting since the first fire. The woman rested a hand against the stone that held the cold of hidden water. The scout listened to the canyon for the footstep that would mean they had been found. The sun slid toward the rim, and the valley lit like a bowl of copper. Somewhere below, a gate creaked. The horses snorted, nervous at a smell on the wind. The Apache drew a breath meant to steady all three hearts. Then a single rifle cracked, and a puff of dust leapt from the rock near the woman's shoulder, and the sound rolled through the canyon like a verdict that had not yet been spoken. The sound of the rifle still echoed through the valley, bouncing off the stone until it felt like the whole world was made of thunder. Dust rose where the bullet struck, curling into the still air before fading away. The woman froze, her breath caught between fear and disbelief. The Apache moved first, pulling her down behind a rock. His hand pressed against her shoulder, firm and grounding, though his heartbeat pounded just as fast as hers. "They've found us," the scout whispered, crouching near the edge of the cliff. He peered over, eyes narrowing at the movement below. The captain brought more men. "They've split into two groups, one heading for the river, the other taking the ridge road." The Apache studied the canyon below, his gaze sharp as a hawk's. The soldiers looked small from this height, just moving specks of dust and steel, but he knew what those lines of motion meant. They were closing the trap. The valley was wide but ended in one way out the gate at the far end, guarded now by rifles and greed. The woman clutched the ledger close to her chest. "If they take it all this, everything will be for nothing," she said. "They won't," he answered, though his voice carried a shadow. He knew the captain wasn't chasing her only for the book. The man hunted what the ledger represented, proof that power could bleed. The scout looked between them. "You have to move before they circle the ridge. There's a path through the tunnels. It'll take you above the river. We'll draw them away." "You'll be killed," the woman said quickly. He smiled faintly, a sad sort of bravery in his eyes. "Better one ghost than three." The Apache shook his head. "We stay together." "No," the scout said. "You'll need both your lives if you want the truth to live." Below, the captain barked an order. His voice carried up the canyon, steady and cold. "No one leaves that valley alive." "Bring me the book." The woman's grip tightened. The Apache placed a hand over hers, steadying her trembling fingers. "We move," he said simply, and that was enough. They crawled along the ledge, every step echoing in the hollow air. The wind rose again, bringing the scent of gunpowder and the faint cry of a hawk circling high above. The Apache moved first, his every motion quiet and deliberate. Behind him, the woman followed, her breath shallow but determined. She had stopped being afraid of dying. Now she was afraid of failing. The scout stayed low, scanning the ridge below. He saw the captain's men fan out, rifles glinting in the morning light. Then he caught sight of a single figure on horseback riding fast along the canyon floor, one of the rancher's men. Not a soldier, wearing a black hat and a scar that ran from temple to jaw. The scout recognized him. The man had once laughed while lighting the torches that burned a village. A rage simmered behind his calm eyes. The Apache led the woman into a narrow slit in the rock, barely wide enough for one horse to pass at a time. The tunnel swallowed them in cool darkness. The sound of the outside world faded, replaced by the quiet drip of unseen water and the whisper of wind through cracks. The air smelled like earth and ancient time. "This way," he murmured, holding a small flame from a strip of pitchwood. The flicker lit the carvings on the wall spirals, handprints, markings of the people who had walked this path long before any war had come. She reached out and traced one faint shape with her fingers. "What do they mean?" she asked softly. "Stories," he said. "Some are prayers, some are warnings." She looked at him. "Which is this?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The shadows around them felt like both. Behind them, the echo of gunfire cracked faintly through the canyon. The scout's rifle answered once, then again, closer this time. The Apache paused for only a heartbeat before moving faster. The tunnel twisted, then opened to a ledge high above the valley floor. From here, they could see the whole world laid bare, the river curling below like silver thread, the wagons clustered near the willows, and the men spreading out like ants around spilled sugar. The woman clutched the rock beside her. "They're closing in." The Apache studied the movement. "They're not chasing us," he said. "They're driving us towards something." He was right. At the far end of the valley, near the mouth of the river, stood a small column of smoke. Not campfire smoke signal smoke. Ow. The captain was calling for reinforcements. "We'll never outrun them," she said. He turned to her, his eyes fierce but calm. "Then we don't run. We make them see what they've done." "How?" she whispered. "By showing them what they fear most." The scout's voice came from behind, rough and strained. "They're moving faster than I thought." He stumbled into view, his sleeve torn and blood seeping from a graze on his arm. "I took one out, maybe two. They'll be here soon." The Apache tore a strip of cloth from his own tunic and wrapped the boy's arm tight. The woman pressed the ledger into the scout's hands. "If anything happens, you take this. Find someone who will listen." He shook his head. "No, I'm not leaving you." The Apache looked between them. "We'll hold them long enough to reach the river. After that, the truth will have its own voice." They descended the slope, moving fast but low, cutting between rocks and dead brush. The sun was climbing now, harsh and merciless. The air shimmered. A single hawk circled above, its cry lost in the distance. When they reached the bend near the water, the Apache stopped. Across the river stood the captain, flanked by his men. He looked calm, almost polite, his hat tilted against the glare. "Throw it down," he called out. "It's a book, and maybe I'll let you keep breathing long enough to beg." The woman's breath hitched. The Apache stepped in front of her. His voice was steady. "You've burned enough villages. How many pages will you burn to hide your sins?" The captain smiled thinly. "You should have stayed in the hills. Savage, you'd have lived longer." The scout raised his rifle, but the Apache motioned for him to wait. "He wants you angry," he murmured. "That's how he wins." The woman took a step forward. "You lied to everyone," she said, her voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "You stole from the land, from the tribes, from your own soldiers." The captain's eyes narrowed. "You think anyone will believe a runaway and a traitor?" The Apache's hand brushed her arm, grounding her again. "Belief isn't what we need," he said quietly. "Only time." The first shot came from the ridge. A bullet struck the dirt near their feet, spraying dust. Then another followed, closer. The Apache grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward a low rise of rocks. The scout fired back, hitting one of the soldiers by the riverbank. Gunfire erupted, echoing across the canyon. Horses screamed. The air filled with the sharp scent of smoke and fear. The Apache moved like a shadow, his bow drawn, his every shot finding its mark. The woman crouched low, clutching the ledger against her chest, her pulse a drumbeat in her ears. The captain shouted an order. More men spread out along the ridge. The Apache's arrows thudded into the sand. Scout fired again, then hissed through his teeth as another bullet grazed his shoulder. "They're surrounding us," he said. The Apache looked around quickly. The cliffs loomed to one side, the river to the other. There was nowhere left to run. But above them, carved into the wall, a narrow fissure split the stone a last chance. He said, pointing. "We reached that ledge. We can cross to the other side." "It's too steep," the woman said. "Not if we climb before they reload." The scout nodded. "I'll cover you." "No," the Apache said. "You go first. The woman after you, I'll follow." The scout hesitated, then nodded. He handed the rifle to the woman and began to climb. Bullets cracked against the stone. She followed, fingers raw on the sharp rock. The Apache stayed below, moving between boulders, returning fire with his bow. The captain shouted again, his voice filled with fury now. "Take them alive." The woman reached for the next handhold, her arms trembling. The scout grabbed her wrist and pulled her up to the narrow ledge. Below, the Apache fired his last arrow, striking a soldier in the chest before grabbing a loose rifle from the ground. "Come on," she cried. He looked up once, eyes locking with hers. "Keep moving," he said. "Don't stop." Another shot rang out, a flash of smoke near the captain. The sound hit before the thought did. The Apache staggered, the rifle slipping from his hand. His body swayed but didn't fall yet. The woman screamed his name, her voice breaking like the cliff beneath her feet. The scout grabbed her, dragging her higher away from the line of fire. The Apache pressed a hand to his side, blood darkening the fabric. He lifted his gaze once more toward the ledge where she stood. "Go," he whispered. Then he turned toward the river, toward the men still advancing through smoke and chaos. The captain watched him come, eyes narrowed, his pistol raised. The storm that had been building inside the canyon was finally ready to break, and everything the river, the truth, and the hearts that carried it was about to be tested in fire. The river roared louder than the guns now. The storm that had been gathering all day finally broke across the valley, rolling down in dark sheets that blurred the ground between life and death. The Apache staggered near the water's edge, one hand pressed against his wound, the other gripping the rifle. He could hear the woman's voice faintly above the thunder, calling his name, but he couldn't look back. The captain was still standing across the river, framed by smoke and lightning, his pistol steady. Around him, the last of his men were scattered, either wounded or too afraid to move. The air smelled of rain and gunpowder, and something else changed. The Apache drew one deep breath and steadied his aim. His vision swayed, but he could still see the captain's face through the haze. The man smirked, as if sure of his victory. "You're finished," he shouted over the wind. "That book dies with you." The Apache's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, a shot came from the cliff above. The captain jerked backward, his weapon falling from his hand. The scout stood there, smoke rising from the barrel of his rifle. His expression was calm but heavy, as if he had just buried the last piece of his old life. The captain fell into the river, the current pulling him away, his hat spinning once before vanishing beneath the storm-swollen water. The Apache dropped to his knees. The pain in his side burned like fire, and his strength drained fast. The woman reached him moments later, stumbling down the rocks, her dress torn and soaked with rain. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed against the wound. "Hold on," she whispered. "Please don't leave me now." He tried to smile. "You made it," he said softly. "That's all that matters." The scout climbed down after her, his face streaked with dirt and rain. "We have to move him," he said. "The river's rising." Together they carried the Apache to a shallow cave above the floodline. The rain thundered outside, washing away the tracks and the blood. Inside, the fire they managed to light flickered weakly against the damp walls. The woman sat close, her fingers intertwined with his. "You saved us," she said. "You saved everything." He shook his head slowly. "The land saved us. It always does when we listen." The scout sat nearby, watching the storm fade into mist. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly. The woman looked at the ledger lying beside her. The pages were damp but still legible, the ink smudged but not lost. "Take this to the towns," she said. "To the papers, to anyone who still believes truth has value." He nodded. "I'll try to silence you. Then I'll keep talking," she said. "Someone has to." The Apache's breathing grew shallower, but his eyes remained open, watching the small flame dance before them. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything," she whispered. "Don't let them make you hate," he said. "Hate makes the soul small. You saw what it did to them." Tears slipped down her face, mixing with the rain still clinging to her skin. "I won't," she said. "Swear I won't." He smiled faintly, his hand tightening around hers one last time. "Hey, then you'll live free." The firelight flickered across his face, softening the lines of pain. His eyes closed, not from fear, but from peace. The woman leaned forward, her forehead resting against his hand. The scout turned away, giving her the silence she needed. Outside, the rain eased, and the sound of the river softened to a gentle rush. The valley, scarred and wild, began to breathe again. By morning, the storm had passed. Mist hung low over the canyon, curling like smoke from the earth. The woman and the scout buried the Apache near the edge of the river, beneath a lone cottonwood that had survived every flood and fire before it. She placed one of his carved arrowheads in the soil, a symbol of his people, of the strength that would live beyond the grave. When it was done, she stood by the water, the ledger clutched against her chest. The scout placed a hand on her shoulder. "He'd have wanted you to keep moving," he said. She nodded. "I will, but I'll come back." This place deserves to be remembered. They rode east together, following the trail that led to the settlements. Days turned into weeks, and the land changed around the mountains, giving way to plains, rivers shrinking to dusty streams. Along the way, she shared their story with anyone who would listen. Farmers, ranchers, travelers at lonely way stations. Edgeone heard how greed had twisted the promise of peace, how a man of the desert had stood against it. Some doubted her, some turned away. But a few believed, and that was enough to keep her going. When they reached the nearest town, she went straight to the printing office. The editor, a weary man with ink-stained hands, read the ledger in silence. His eyes hardened as he turned each page. "If what you say is true," he murmured, "this will burn half the territory. Then let it burn," she said. "Maybe something better can grow from the ashes." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll print it. But you should leave before the smoke reaches here." She thanked him and left quietly. Outside, the scout waited with the horses. "It's done?" he asked. "It's done," she said. "Now it's in the hands of the people." They stayed that night at the edge of town. The stars were bright again, the air cool and calm. For the first time in months, she felt she could breathe without looking over her shoulder. Yet a part of her heart stayed behind in that canyon, where the river ran, and the man who had saved her lay sleeping under the cottonwood tree. When morning came, the scout told her he planned to ride north, to join a small community of settlers who believed in peace without profit. "The world needs men who still know the difference," she said. "And women who remind them why it matters," he replied. He offered his hand. "You'll make it, you know." She smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'll never forget where the road began." They parted at the crossroads, the dust of their horses mingling before drifting apart. She rode east, toward the sunrise. The light broke over the horizon, painting the plains in gold. Every mile she put between herself and that valley seemed to carry part of its spirit with her, the echo of the Apache's voice, the steady beat of his horse's hooves, the memory of his words. In the months that followed, the story spread. Newspapers printed the truth from the ledger, and the people began to ask questions. The rancher disappeared from his estate. The fort's flag came down, replaced by a new command that promised fairness. It wasn't justice in the clean sense, but it was a start. The land began to heal, slowly in its own way. Sometimes, when the wind carried the scent of rain, the woman would stop wherever she was and close her eyes. In that moment, she could almost hear the river again, and the faint echo of a voice saying, "Don't let them make you hate." It reminded her that even in a world scarred by greed and loss, love could still root itself deep in the soil and grow back stronger. Years later, travelers passing through the valley would sometimes speak of a lone cottonwood standing by the water, its branches reaching wide like open arms. They said it was the marker of a warrior's grave, though no one remembered his name. But every spring, when the snow melt came rushing down from the mountains, the river sang louder there as if it carried his spirit in its current. The woman, now older and quieter, returned one last time. She rode down the same winding path, her heart heavy but steady. When she reached the cottonwood, she dismounted and stood before it, laying a small carved pendant at its roots, the one he had given her when they first rested by the canyon fire. "I kept my promise," she said softly. "The truth lives now. And so do you." The breeze lifted her hair, carrying her words through the valley. The river glistened under the afternoon sun, its sound soft and endless. She stood there until the shadows grew long, then turned her horse toward the horizon. As she rode away, the cottonwood swayed gently, and the sound of the river rose behind her like a heartbeat. Somewhere in that rhythm was his memory, not lost, not forgotten, just part of the land he had loved. And for the first time since the day he had taken her hand, she felt the peace he had spoken of, the kind that doesn't come from safety, but from knowing that some souls never truly die. They just become part of the earth and the wind and the stories that keep the world honest.